Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Broadband Solutions discussion, sponsored by the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, USA Today Network Wisconsin, and Marquette University's OBrien Fellowship in Public Service Journalism. I'm Rick Barrett, reporter with the Journal Sentinel and a recent OBrien Fellow. We are honored to have with us 7 experts in the broadband and telecommunications fields, whom I will introduce shortly. With their help in 2 groups, we're going to have a lively and informative discussion about the challenges of making high-speed internet service, like electricity, available to every household in the state. If the solutions were easy, the problems would have already been solved. But unfortunately, there are still thousands of people in rural Wisconsin and in cities lacking an affordable and reliable home internet service connection. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Dave Umhofer, director of the OBrien program at Marquette and a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. During my OBrien Fellowship, Dave was incredibly supportive of my reporting on broadband issues, especially early on in the pandemic when we had to scramble and come up with workaround solutions for just about everything. So I'd like to introduce Dave, please.
Thank you so much, Rick, for your work and that of your Marquette student journalism team of Kelly Arsenault and Chris Miller. And of course, thank you to our partners at the Journal Sentinel. The kind of in-depth work that you have produced is what the OBrien Fellowship loves to support. It's why we bring professional journalists to Marquette for a full year with full funding. We try to support journalism that educates people about possible solutions, not just problems. And I hope this dialogue today can spark some needed change. Rick, I know you're not done with your broadband reporting. You are the hardest working guy in journalism, I think. We look forward to upcoming stories, looking at the issues, especially as it plays out in urban areas. Thanks to all our guests today. Have a great show, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that very much. Now we're going to play a short video from Buffalo County, Wisconsin, where Mike and Sandra Wright have struggled with poor internet and phone service, the latter of which was a serious concern when on February 3rd, 2019, Mike was injured in an accident on the farm.
Our internet's very slow because oftentimes it's what we call the roundy. You sit and watch the round. You go round and round and round and round and round. So sometimes we have to get up in the middle of the night or early in the morning or something like that to even use it. So, and we're trying to start a small business here, and it's almost impossible to get it off the ground. So just a short distance from here, there's 2 different places that are copper wire that's laid right on the ground, and it was hooked to corn, and it was wrapped around barbed wire and stuff, not buried. Whenever it rains, then our phone doesn't work very good. Of course, the internet is almost impossible. 2 years ago, there was our shed that had a lot of snow load on it, and it collapsed. The roof ended up collapsing on me, and I happened to be in a spot that it didn't kill me, unfortunately, but my wife had trouble getting through in a panic to 911 to help me out. It's greatly concerning because you never know what's going to happen. We had a neighbor that had a heart attack and she couldn't get a hold of 911 or through 911, and I had that accident, so you never know. Well, it's important because just to have that connection with the world and what's going on and with health and with just all kinds of things are shifting to internet. Even something simple as directions to put something together. I mean, it's getting pretty basic, and even affects our land values here, because if you don't have it, then people don't want to come here, and just all sorts of ways like that. It can be more effective for us. It's much like the back in the day when the electric and power, it came to the cities, and then it didn't come to the rural. Rural had to wait many, many years, and finally they got the rural electrification movement where they brought the electric out. And because of it wasn't really a money maker for the big corporations, they formed co-ops and they brought in electricity, which brought farms into the next movement or what's going on. And Yeah, I really believe that if you were to make the internet more available, actually, really to the rural people, it would really benefit in jobs and in many different ways, because the internet has so much variation or different things to offer that it would be extremely helpful for all those who are out here, and especially for the economy of the rural areas.
Okay, very good. Now, in our first group of experts, we have Shirley Bloomfield, Wisconsin native and CEO of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, Rebecca Cameron Valcq, chairperson of the Wisconsin Public Service Commission, Keith Gabbard, CEO of Peoples Rural Telephone Cooperative in McKee, Kentucky, and Jim Tuckwell, chairman of the Vilas County, Wisconsin Economic Development Corp. Welcome to all of you, and thanks very much for being here today. To begin with, I've got some prepared questions, and I wonder if we could just maybe jump right in. First question for Shirley. What are some of the innovative solutions you've seen for getting service to rural places, and how did it happen? What did it take to make it happen, Shirley?
Well, thank you so much. And I'm delighted to join this conversation, because you said it perfectly when we kicked off, Rick, that if broadband were cheap or easy, we'd actually have this already taken care of. And I think if there's one lesson we as a country have learned over the pandemic, it has been how critically important connectivity is to all Americans, whether you live in inner city, whether you live in rural America, and whether it's 35 million percent of the population that is unserved, or whether it's 17%, just depending on who you talk to. So the way we look at this is there's really a rural divide. There's a rural America that is served by interests that are not local, and you've got a rural America like my membership that are actually served by their community-based providers, the folks who are their neighbors, the folks who really live and die by whether or not the community is able to survive economically, whether you're able to bring telemedicine, precision ag, all of the kind of initiatives we know are so very, very important. And the other component is, I also think we have an affordability divide. So when you talk about, all right, what's it going to take to get the job done? There's a couple of things that I would share just from the experience of working with my member companies. About 70% have fiber directly to the home for their consumers. And I will share that number in Wisconsin is even higher. There are a huge percentage of my companies that are fiber completely within their network. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think, first of all, looking to community-based providers. Who are the entities that are in these communities that actually have a vested interest in that connectivity, that live and work and go to church and see in the grocery store their consumer base? They know how important it is to connect their schools to the school children, particularly when there are times of need. I think there's also, honestly, access to resources. It's one of the reasons, and I'm assuming we'll talk about it, but why this infrastructure initiative that just is on the verge of being signed into law is so powerful. But I also look at some of the resources that have come down already, the CARES Act, the ARPA money, and the fact that you actually have a state that has been so innovative about how to use it. And an example I'll throw out there is Novato Telephone Cooperative in northern Wisconsin is actually literally in the process of building fiber to the communities, where they have been able to partner with those local communities to get the job done through some of that ARPA resources. The third thing I would say is looking at things like affordability, digital inclusion, adoption. What are those pieces that are not plant in the ground, but are just as important to thinking through how we build some momentum around getting broadband deployed and getting people to understand the value proposition that broadband brings to them. The fourth, I would say, is robust state efforts. And this is where I think Wisconsin shines. As a matter of fact, Wisconsin actually gets an A rating from the R Street Institute for the implementation of what you've been doing. You have a very active broadband office. Kudos to you, because there's a lot of states that are way behind Wisconsin's effort. You have a very proactive PUC. Another real plus. How do you get somebody who can connect all of the dots to where funding is coming in and how to get it out to the right places and to the right communities? And last, I would just say partnerships. It's really all about thinking how we can create whatever flavor it is of partnerships, whether it's telcos working with telcos, whether it's broadband providers working with their localities. Like you just showed the couple in Buffalo County. I have a telephone co-op that is bringing fiber thanks to the partnership they've just been able to forge with Buffalo through the ARPA money. And telcos working with electric cooperatives. How do we get local utilities working together to take that scope and scale and spread it? So those are some things that are just off the top of my head.
Okay, very good, Shirley. Thank you very much. The next question, please, for Rebecca. What should Wisconsin expect from the new federal infrastructure plan spending on broadband? And will it be enough to bridge the rural digital divide once and for all, Rebecca?
Well, thanks, Rick. And I want to thank you for the series of reporting that you did going back to last year. I think it's really important that we get information out, but that when we do get it out, that it's correct. And you did an excellent job, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds. And then I just want to say thank you to Shirley. I promise I didn't ask her to sing our praises, but she's exactly right. Our state broadband office here at the Public Service Commission is second to none. In fact, we are fielding calls from public service commissions across the country wanting to know how and what we have done to get us to this point. So I will answer your question about the new infrastructure bill, Rick, but before I do that, I would be remiss if I don't repeat it right here, the very exciting announcement that came out this morning. And that is the governor and I announced this morning that we are doubling down on broadband expansion in Wisconsin, and we are going to award another $100 million in broadband expansion grant funding. We intend to open up that grant round December 1st-ish, don't hold me to that. And we, with the eye towards being able to be in a position to award grants late spring, early summer of 2022. We know because the governor allocated $100 million under the ARPA funding, we know that if we work quickly and efficiently to get those dollars out the door, while being very responsible stewards of those dollars and ensuring that there's transparency and that there is accountability behind those dollars, but we know that we can deploy them and get them where they are needed, where they're needed the most. And we saw that with that first initial round of the $100 million under the ARPA funding. Because as we all know, and anybody who's listening and all of the panelists on this particular topic, we can all agree, broadband is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is a necessity for everyday living. And that is just becoming more and more apparent. Also, as Shirley indicated, we are getting to the point where we are starting to take a very, very close look at affordability. We know that it is not just accessibility, but it's affordability. In fact, just last week, the Education Superhighway released its No Home Left Offline report. And for Wisconsin specifically, it shows that for the percentage of our population that is without broadband, 49% is due to affordability. So I can tell you that we at the State Broadband Office here at the Public Service Commission have been and will continue to look at affordability because you can't have just access without affordability. Of course, the third leg of that stool is digital literacy. That's another issue that we are paying extremely close attention to. That's a long way of getting back to your question, Rick, which is what does the infrastructure bill mean for Wisconsin? Well, I'll tell you what it's going to mean. We have been keeping a very close eye on this all summer. We have already begun work on the 5-year plan that's required. Of course, we're still waiting for the guidance. We know that the agency has some time before they have to issue their initial guidance. But we know that states will get at least $100 million each, and the rest of the dollars that will be allocated to states will be based upon the number of the unserved households in each state. We also know that a part of the infrastructure bill will focus on affordable and reliable high-speed internet. What does that mean? It means low-cost broadband. And it means high-speed broadband infrastructure to the unserved and underserved. So we are waiting for final guidance, of course, and for it to be formally signed. But we are working on and will continue to work on the 5-year plan that is required. And we will continue to try to get those dollars out as quickly, but in as targeted a way as possible. I think that's a really important point, and I'm so happy that there's such a great cross-section of people on this panel, because it's not just about writing checks where we think the money should go. It's about using the best data that we can get our hands on to ensure that the dollars are going to very targeted areas, to ensure that we're not either overlapping the funds where they shouldn't be overlapped, but that we're not missing very, very important parts of our state. So we're looking forward to it. We are ready, but there is still work to be done for sure.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Rebecca. And we've just been joined by Kelly Arsenault, who is an OBrien intern at Marquette University. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, sorry about that delayed adding.
No worries. Next question we wanted to go with, please. Keith, if you would tell us, please, what's worked for you in getting high-speed internet to nearly every home in your part of Eastern Kentucky, and what's your advice for others?
Thank you, Rick, for inviting me, a Kentuckian, on this call, and I appreciate the opportunity. And of course, we live in southeastern Kentucky, very rural Appalachian mountains. Our largest town is about 700 people. We serve 2 whole counties, and we've built fiber optic fiber to the home to 100% of our homes and businesses in both counties that we serve, no matter where you live. And we've had that. We started that in 2008. We finished it in 2014. So we've actually had fiber to the home to every single premise for the last 7 years. The way we did that was through a combination of 60% government loan, 30% grant, and about 10% of our own capital. We just think that fiber optic is the way to go, and anybody that can possibly get fiber, that's what they need, because we can provide up to a gigabit to every single person in both counties that we serve. We've seen a huge impact in work from home jobs. We've partnered with our electric cooperative with some other folks here to start a little training hub for work from home and help people get jobs working from home. And we've helped create up to as many as 1,200 jobs in our 2 counties in the last 5 years, partly because of excellent broadband. And I live in a very poor community. There's a lot of poverty here, so we dealt with the availability and the affordability, and we see both as a challenge where I live in Eastern Kentucky. But it's being able to have fiber optic has changed lives here, and it's changed them for the better, whether it's from their work, whether it's for medical care, whether it's for education. During the pandemic, it's just escalated the need for all that, as we all know. Our company is Peoples Rural Telephone Cooperative. We're a nonprofit. We were started in 1950 when nobody had telephones here. So we see this broadband thing as the guy said in the video, something like providing electric to everyone. We just feel like everyone, no matter where they live, deserves to have quality broadband, and we think fiber optic is the best way to do it if possible.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Keith. Next question, please. Jim Tuckwell. What's worked for you in Wisconsin's North Woods, and what's your advice for communities who are struggling to get better service?
Thanks, Rick, and thanks for having me on today. We have a real opportunity here to improve broadband. We do have places in the county where it's excellent, and we have places in the county where it's not so much. And so our approach, given that we were fortunate to have 8 different internet service providers servicing Vilas County right now. And so we've taken the lead for the county starting about 1.5 years ago as the Vilas County Economic Development Corporation, and we're also a nonprofit, to really work with internet service providers and work with each of our communities, of which there's 14 towns and townships, and also the Lac du Flambeau tribe, and help each one of those and work with each one of those to develop their own broadband work groups. Because we have a number of different internet service providers, we don't really have a one-size-fits-all, kind of a solution available. So we're working with each of the different communities to help define what is the best strategy for them, and then to work together with the ISPs, the internet service providers, to accomplish that. Particularly now with the beginning rollout of the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF, we're working to identify, how that rolls out throughout the county, and working with the towns and ISPs to see, which addresses are not in the approved RDOF census tracts, so that we can identify how to, as RDOF implementation is rolling out, also address the non-approved RDOF addresses, so that we can really bring broadband throughout the whole county in an equal fashion. That's really critical to our strategy to diversify and grow our economy, which is very much tourism based. Our strategy is to recruit entrepreneurs, remote workers, and expanding businesses. We began this before the pandemic, and actually the pandemic proved the strategy. But rolling out broadband equally throughout the county is key to accomplishing that. And so that's really the approach, working individually and developing individual strategies and connecting the ISPs with the townships, and trying to make it as efficient as possible for the ISPs to get things done.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jim. Some questions now for the overall group, and I'll just kind of toss it out here for everyone. With the Biden infrastructure money, will rural areas that already have, modest service of 25 megabits per second downloads, 3 megabit per second uploads, will they be eligible for an upgrade, or how do you foresee the infrastructure money being used?
I'll go ahead and just jump in if that's okay, Rick. So I think one of the things that Congress did extremely well in this initiative was they really thought through, how do we prioritize? And obviously the highest priority are those folks who are just unconnected. We've got a lot of work to do to make sure that what people used to think was acceptable speeds, and I think every one of us would say what we thought. We would laugh at the fact that 10.1 is acceptable. We wouldn't be able to do this streaming event right now if that's what we were all on. But we've really got to make sure that we prioritize those who are not yet connected. And that's one of the things that I think the legislation actually does a very, very good job of. And so I think you will see, as Rebecca pointed out, we now hit the regulatory process. So while everybody's very excited about this law being signed into law, it now has to go through the rulemaking for NTIA. And NTIA is a department within the Commerce Department that is going to be controlling the $42 billion that will literally be dollars that'll be going into plant. The rest of that money that equals the total $65 billion for broadband will go into things like affordability and digital literacy and tribal support and middle mile support and some of those initiatives. So I think that's really important. But those who are at what we would consider to be subpar speeds, which in this legislation is anything less than 100/20, will actually also then kind of be on that path. But I think what we're going to do is see a lot of sequencing. I also think that NTIA is going to provide a lot of guidance to states, but I think, again, this is where Wisconsin has a head start by having leadership at the state level and at the broadband office level and at the commission level and the governor's office that has really been focused already on how will that money come down. And, the other point of that is mapping. And that is an initiative that, to be really honest with you, even though the FCC finally has been given the federal resources to start their heavy lifting on this, the mapping is critical. If we're going to put federal dollars into any parts of broadband initiative, we've got to know, where are the unserved? Where are the underserved? What does that look like? Jim referenced RDOF. What will happen if some of those properties get taken off the table? What happens if some folks who actually want some of that funding back away from their commitment? So there's a lot of different steps in this process, because the other thing that I think we've got to be really mindful of is making sure that folks who get this support and get this funding actually can do and will do what they commit to doing, because otherwise it's the consumers who are going to be the big losers in the process. So I think that the vetting, the challenge process, all of those things are also going to be really, really important.
Yeah, if I could, Rick, I'd like to echo what Shirley said, and I think it's, again, for our strategy, extremely important to address the unserved and greatly underserved. And I couldn't agree more on the mapping point, which is why, as the RDOF process was being worked through and the bidding and decisions were being made, we implemented a survey across the county. It's the phase one. We'll be doing a phase two of the survey after the first of the year. But we're now building a database and working with our county geomapping department to get that data and identify on a household by household basis, at an address level, what their speeds are, and really clearly identifying where we need to focus.
And Rick, if I could just jump in, we are going to replicate something similar to that on a statewide level, because we know that we need to have really good data before we go down the deployment path, especially as we get now to the areas where we are making meaningful progress in terms of reducing the number of truly unserved. We still need really good data to see who remains unserved or who remains critically underserved. And we are going to be issuing an internet self-report to the state of Wisconsin that's going to be coming before the end of the year. We are also exploring ways to really get spatial data from those who are applying for broadband grants, because we know that if we have that data, we can use a scapula instead of a big machete in terms of being able to figure out where those dollars go. And then the last point I will make, and Shirley touched on this, is that under the prior round, under the ARPA guidelines, it was very clear that those dollars had to be used for fiber. There was really no wiggle room in the way that the guidance was written. And a lot of people ask me, well, if you have this sort of embarrassment of riches coming from the federal level, why do you still need dollars at the state level? And the answer is because you can't build fiber everywhere. We recognize that fiber is future-proof. We recognize that fiber is the best technology out there right now. We also recognize that we have things like cranberry bogs in the state of Wisconsin, where burying fiber just isn't feasible. So there are very unique and specific circumstances where something like fixed wireless or something like a satellite would be the only way that we can really get to those who remain unserved.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Rebecca. That kind of leads right into my next question. What about Starlink? I mean, could that be the universal solution? And for people who aren't familiar with it, Starlink is the effort by Elon Musk with low Earth orbit satellites. I mean, potentially it could reach everywhere in rural America. What are your thoughts on it, please?
Well, we actually have one of our volunteers at the Vilas County Economic Development Corporation that's a software engineer for a high-tech company, a Fortune 500 company in California. He's been in the beta program since last November, and he's getting excellent results. He's gotten as much as 160 megabytes down and 40 megabytes up. He averages kind of 65 down and 15 up. Very little downtime, and according to him, it quote just works, unquote, even in 20 below zero weather. And the antenna dish is actually heated, and so here in northern Wisconsin, where we get a lot of snow, it melts the snow. So it's worked out very, very well for him, and we do recommend, and we get good feedback from others who have implemented as well. The negative feedback comes from people that can't see enough blue sky, and it just doesn't work in their geographic setting. However, to answer your question, I think the Starlink business model really isn't to compete with the traditional internet service providers or to compete with fiber. It really is designed and aimed at a market that's, quote, kind of at the end of the road. And that's where we see it fitting here in northern Wisconsin. And it's the beta program, which was targeted to end at the end of last month. It has, for those that got into it, has worked out very, very well.
Okay.
And I'm probably going to be a little bit less bullish. I think that it is going to take every tool in the toolkit. We know that. We know that if we're really talking about connectivity for everybody, and they're just going to be localities that will have more challenges. I think fiber is absolutely the right investment. It's the fastest. You can do synchronous speeds, and that's another thing we have learned during the pandemic is that it's not just it's not just the downloads. It's the uploads now. If you've got somebody sitting at the kitchen counter doing a VPN, somebody zooming, you need that upload speed, and we monitor. Our members share their network usage, and that demand for uploading is going up as well. Significantly for a rural area, it also has a lower OpEx because you're doing a lot fewer truck rolls. You're able to manage the network. It's also a greener technology. It uses less energy. The thing that I get concerned about with the satellite is that, they've won a lot of money in some federal initiatives, including RDOF, to put broadband into places where they've never commercially been able to offer the speeds that they are saying that they're able to do. And I also think it's an expensive option. And I think, it's $500 for the base station, $99 a month. You're looking at $1,200 annually for a family to get broadband connectivity. That's going to price some people out. And what I'd be fascinated to hear with the beta testers is it's limited capacity. So right now there's only a certain number of users on it. You start putting more users on a satellite network, you see that degradation happen very, very quickly. And as Jim has noted, it is one of those things where, if you don't have a blue sky, you got a storm coming through, you got some other obstacles and interference. I certainly wouldn't want somebody doing a heart surgery using telemedicine on me with a satellite service.
Jumping in there, if you don't mind me hopping in, Rick, real quick. I know, Shirley, you mentioned, that Starlink received so much funding. Aside from Starlink specifically, how are these providers going to be held accountable when they receive that state and federal funding?
That is such an excellent question. And that is so very important if we talk about good governance, because I'll be very frank with you. We've had support programs in the past where I don't think everybody who's been able to participate really did kind of have their feet to the fire in terms of, I'm going to serve this community, I'm going to serve these number of homes. There wasn't really that due diligence coming back and saying, so did you do it? And did you provide the speed that you said you were going to provide? So that is another provision that we actually worked very hard at when the bill was being crafted, was to ensure that there is that sense of due diligence on everybody's part, from the federal part, from the state part. And the other thing that I think you'll see this go around, particularly given the size of this program, is consumers themselves will be very tuned in. When you hear that somebody won an award from the state of Wisconsin through the infrastructure bill or even through ARPA, saying that broadband is coming, that fiber is coming, and you don't get it. I'd like to think there will be like an informal crowdsourcing to share, some of that accountability. But there will definitely, I think policymakers are very attuned now to making sure that those resources are used well, and also that we, again, don't overbuild in the same areas using federal funds to compete against federal funds for the same consumers, which all that does is continue to alienate those folks who might live in the donut hole, the donut, as opposed to the donut hole, which has the higher density, that is easier to serve, it's cheaper to serve. We've got to make sure that we're getting the ring, we're getting those people who so far have been left out of the connectivity.
That's exactly right. And from a governance and compliance perspective, we at the state level, our broadband expansion grant program since its inception has been run on a reimbursement basis. So we do not send dollars out the door until we know that the project has been completed and that it's been completed in compliance with what the applicant represented when they applied to us. So we do, as we've learned, round after round after round, people talk. And when a community gets what they deem to be passed over, they keep an eye out, and they I think Shirley said it correctly. You know, it's almost like a crowdfunding type of compliance, but we have that in our grant agreements. So we are only reimbursing once the project is completed.
Okay, very good. This has been great. Very, very helpful. And we're going to get back to you all in just a little bit, but I want to make sure we have enough time for our second group too. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit. And I'd like to remind everyone who's watching this online also, please submit questions through the chat. We'd love to have your questions and thoughts on this as we go along. Our next group of experts will focus on the challenges of getting an affordable home internet connection to thousands of people in cities, including Milwaukee and Madison, where service is often available, usually available, but in some neighborhoods, it's substandard or isn't widely used. Vicki Robinson is General Manager of Microsoft Corporation's Airband Initiative that's launched broadband projects in Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Los Angeles, among other places. She's joined by Mayor Jim Paine of the City of Superior, Wisconsin, and Barry Orton, Professor Emeritus, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you all very much. First question will go out to Vicki. Vicki, would you please tell us more about Microsoft's project in the Lindsay Heights neighborhood of Milwaukee, and what's your personal connection to it?
Thanks for having me, Rick. It's really great to be here. I'm actually a Milwaukee native. And so for many reasons, I'm glad that the stars have aligned in a way to bring me here to this moment in time. So we are in Milwaukee for a number of reasons. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the Microsoft Airband Initiative, which was actually founded a little over 4 years ago with the focus on what Microsoft could do and bring to bear as part of the collective solutions to close the broadband digital divide. And our focus at that time was very much on rural areas, which makes sense if you just take a step back and think about, where the gaps exist. Where rural communities stands out, because what we're talking about when you think about the digital divide and how it presents itself is in large part talking about areas that have no access to service. What we've done since that time, actually a little over a year ago, is expanded our work and our footprint into urban centers. And we've done this work as part of broader work that Microsoft is doing to address racial inequity. And so what we're doing now as part of the Airband community, the Airband Initiative, is expanding our footprint, not just to what we could do and partnering with others to help close the rural digital divide, but what we can do to actually meet the urban digital divide as it presents itself. In that instance, Rick, what we tend to be talking about and focused on is not lack of access to a service, but really how do we drive adoption, a primary barrier to which is cost and affordability, which brings us to Milwaukee. And so as part of that work where we've extended our footprint into urban centers, we really want to focus on areas where there is a large concentration of racial and ethnic minorities who were not connected, essentially offline. And so if you look at the data for Milwaukee, it's quite stark, and it's important to have your thoughts and your work anchored in data. And so if you look at the FCC's data, versus Microsoft data and where things stand in the county of Milwaukee, according to the FCC, broadband is available in 100% of the county. That's the data. If you look at Microsoft data, which focuses on the number of people who are actually using the internet at broadband speed, you see quite a different picture. You will see that based on that data, there is a little under 400,000 people in Milwaukee County alone who are not connected. That represents over 35% of that population, which is huge. And so from our perspective, if you're really talking about getting underneath the problem, you have to start with the data and hard data in mind. And so it's against that backdrop that we were able to include Milwaukee as one of our 8 signature cities in which we wanted to to try different solutions to address the digital divide as it presents itself. And so it was, I guess it was serendipitous that we find ourselves in Lindsay Heights. I was actually born in that community. I don't want to say how long ago, but as part of that work, we're partnering with internet service providers as well as nonprofit organizations to really bring digital equity programming to Lindsay Heights and then surrounding areas within Milwaukee. And when I say digital equity programming, what I'm saying here is that we are talking about affordable broadband services. PCs for People, our partner within the city at this time, is providing affordable broadband at $15 a month, and it's for 50 megabits per second down and 10 up. To anyone living in Lindsay Heights. You don't have to go through any elaborate qualifications or applications. If you live there, you can get access to the service, but not just the broadband service itself, but also devices that are affordable. As may be implied in the name, PCs for People actually provides devices as well alongside their affordable connectivity offering. And just as equally as important, and there's lots of scholarship to support this, we're bringing important digital skilling to actually show members of that community how to use broadband connectivity once it's made available, and not just how, but how it can be an accelerator or foundation for driving digital transformation to improve lives of the citizens living in that community and beyond. So we're really excited about this work, and we think that it can stand as a blueprint for how you really address digital divide issues as they present themselves in urban centers, which tend to have historically at least been left out of the conversation. And we cannot do that now at this moment. There's way too much at stake.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Vicki. Jim Paine, please, would you tell us about the open access network that you're planning for the city of Superior, and what are your thoughts behind it, please?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you, Rick. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here today. It's been a really engaging conversation already. So our program, which we're calling Connect Superior, we are Superior, Wisconsin. And for those that aren't close, that's the city that Lake Superior points to. So at the very tip of Lake Superior, we're next to Duluth, Minnesota. Our open access broadband plan meets a lot of the challenges that Vicki was just describing. So the fact is, if you just look at it in raw numbers, most of Superior has access to the internet. If you have enough money and you live in, for the most part, most of the city, you can get a connection, but it isn't always affordable because, as Vicki pointed out, urban centers are often larger collections of people living in poverty and can't afford access, or that connection isn't reliable. And so in an effort to provide access that works in a post-COVID 21st century city, we wanted to move to the public utility model that some of the earliest speakers were talking about, where the city would own the infrastructure. But that can be something of a challenge, and we know a lot of cities have struggled with that in the past. So we wanted to bring in elements of the private sector as well, and that's where the open access element comes in. So the idea is very simple, that we will, well, it's simple in description, if not execution. We are going to build a broadband network that can reach every single home, but the connection will be voluntary. So if you want to stay on a private network, you'll be free to. But much like our standard utilities of wastewater and electricity and water, you'll be able to connect to our backbone network just by giving us a call. You'll incur the cost of that, but we'll be able to bill you monthly, same as any other utility. But we're not going to provide the internet. We're only going to create the backbone network. We're going to invite independent private ISPs to compete on the network. And what makes it open access is, of course, anybody will be able to provide access to the internet on our network, but individual users will be able to switch independently at will whenever they want on their network. And so that's what we're finding is likely to be the most popular part of the service, that if you don't like the internet that you're getting, you can just switch, just push a button and have a different provider. So all told, we completed our master plan to map out the costs. We found that it will in fact decrease costs compared to the private sector, which currently provides a reliable broadband connection. Sometimes it's not very reliable, but to get anything meaningful in modern day America, it's roughly $75 a month for residential. And to get the real high speeds that a lot of businesses demand can be hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. So we're going to provide all of that, commercial and residential, for no more than $55 a month. That's access to the network, construction of the network to your house. You're not going to pay up front. You're just going to pay $55 a month. And that's the most you would pay for the most expensive ISPs that we think. That's roughly the plan.
Okay, very good. Jim, thank you very much. Barry, what are your thoughts on municipal broadband and other alternatives to the large private service providers?
Well, I think I've always thought municipal broadband is a good option. We're in a state that sets up hurdles to municipalities for doing that. It's not as easy as it might seem. But I think right now we're really in a very good position because of the number of dollars that are flowing in this direction. I did want to back up 1 second, and I wanted to praise the PSC and this wave of grants. Up till now, I've always used the same line when evaluating these kinds of grants. I always say it's just about a drop in the bucket in terms of what we need. Well, this time, this round on the state level, we've used probably a whole cupful into the bucket. And now, as we just heard the announcement this morning, another cupful. But finally, this is fortunate timing, the federal government is now turning on the hose. So we're going to have a significant amount of dollars coming through. And I would say that municipalities, other public entities that are looking to provide broadband to their citizen, this is going to be their window of opportunity. One other thing that I think is really important when you're looking at the urban setting, right now, really all the urban broadband that's available, even where the maps, the so-called maps, show complete availability, is via either cable television or via the old DSL on the copper lines. We all know that the copper lines are being thrown out and not replaced by the phone companies. And sooner or later, that same kind of process is going to happen to the coaxial cable. So as we've heard all through this seminar panel, fiber to the premises is really where we've got to go. And that includes municipalities who now are reasonably served, where the service might be spotty in a particular neighborhood, or the service might not extend beyond city limits. At the moment, legally, the cable company is not required to serve everybody in the city. It did historically. So whether the cable company maintains that service, I think we're going to still be in the same position as we were before. Urban and rural are either underserved or unserved, or are becoming less served as the companies allow their plants to deteriorate. So we're really, the urban and the rural are almost in the same boat. And as to reiterate what was said about the maps, we're in a situation now with our original maps of being doctors treating patients with modern medicine using a cave drawing of a person to treat them as the basis of the knowledge. And so we really have to, as Chairperson Valcq said, we really have to fundamentally get a better database so we know what it is we're looking at first, rather than just throw money at a cave drawing.
Okay, very good. Barry, kind of toss this question out to the group here. What are your thoughts about the infrastructure plan in cities? I mean, there's been some concern that are cities going to be eligible for much of this money? I mean, if they're already considered served, how do they stand to benefit from it?
Well, that's going to remain to be seen. Someone had mentioned in the first panel that a lot of this is going to be triggered or gone through via the NTIA, at Commerce. At the moment, NTI is waiting for confirmation of the nominee to be head of it. And that confirmation, the two confirmations at the FCC, are going to be critical to getting all this moving and having some kind of control and some kind of vision. And at the moment, those nominees are waiting. They've just been announced fairly recently, but I don't have great hopes for the Senate moving expeditiously on them.
I would just, sure, thanks, Rick. I'd love to weigh in here. A couple of things. I'm very concerned, and this is, I think that we have to take a step back, and we've been talking about the maps and what the maps mean, what they don't mean. We have to all approach this recognizing that the dollars that have been allocated, the denominator was based on data that was, that not just Microsoft, but many others believe was faulty to begin with. And so in some respects, while definitely a significant down payment and historical in nature in terms of the opportunity and the dollars that have been infused through things like the CARES Act, as well as the American Rescue Plan Act funding, and now the prospect of the infrastructure bill funding, we have to approach this with eyes wide open that at the end of the day, we may not have enough dollars through these various mechanisms that are either in existence now or to come to actually solve this problem in a meaningful way. And so it will be very important as the dynamic shifts from, the FCC, where I spent a lot of my career working on these issues, to NTIA in the states, that we approach this with that in mind. And so it will be critical to establish principles which will dictate, in some instances, trade-offs. So, for example, if we're thinking about not just urban centers, but really everywhere, if you're talking about fiber, in a lot of instances, you may be thinking about, you may be sacrificing time to actually deploy, cost, and whether or not it's cost effective or not. And so I just think that that's important to think through the opportunity just more generally as we talk about the infrastructure bill going into law and how to ensure that cities are not left behind. And I say that, Rick, because if you're already talking about a framework in the infrastructure bill itself, it's heavily weighted towards infrastructure, as implied in the name. I think it's a little over $42 billion of that $65 billion pot, which was originally $100 billion, is allocated strictly for infrastructure. Then you talk about an additional $14 billion that's targeted for affordability, and then there's other money for digital skilling, et cetera. All good and critical components, but it's going to be critical that states and cities and governments work together to have principled approaches to ensure that that no group is left behind, including the cities. And so I do think that there is some things there, even in the ARPA funding. We looked at the Treasury guidance, and we believe that there was, in fact, and there is, in fact, a path to be able to use some of that funding to address affordability, which allows those funds to be used in cities. If we are not really aggressive and thoughtful in our approach, we actually run the risk of putting people who are already disconnected because they may be income insecure or other historically marginalized groups being left further behind. So we need to approach this with eyes wide open about the dollars that we have. What are the trade-offs by going with one path versus another, as opposed to a toolkit approach, and being very specific. I love what Chairman Valcq said about the scalpel, being very specific about what's the problem and how do we want to approach it, recognizing that although it's a lot of money, arguably it may not be enough money, at least in and of itself right now, to actually close the digital divide.
Okay, very good, Vicki. Thank you. This has been great. This panel is really good, just like the other one. In the interest of time here, I think we're going to kind of have to move ahead to some of the submitted questions. So if we may, please, Bill, just bring everybody back here, and let's just toss out questions to everyone here. The first one I had was from Tom Tim in Vilas County. And he says, he lives in eastern Vilas County, and he's wondering what areas will be targeted for expansion And is it going to be better than what they have now, the 25/3 service? So, Jim?
Sure.
Jim Tuckwell?
Actually, just in this latest round of grant funding, there's two projects underway in eastern Vilas County in the town of Washington and just in the area around just east of Eagle River. So I don't know exactly where he is, but yes, those are going to be fiber to the home projects. So they will be faster than the 25/3 that he's mentioning right now.
Okay, very good, Jim. We're going to jump right ahead now with the passage of the broadband, the infrastructure bill and the broadband money. When will we begin to see the grants associated with it, and what form will the application process take? I know it sounds like it's going to be fairly lengthy. What are we looking at, another year or more before we start to see some of these projects in the ground?
So for the $100 million that we just allocated under ARPA, the deadline is December 31st, 2024 for those projects to actually be connecting communities and to residences and to businesses. In terms of the infrastructure bill, we've got to wait until we get that guidance from NTIA to get a better understanding of what the deadlines are going to be. But there is a little bit of lag, right? So I appreciate Professor Orton's analogy of the drop in the bucket and the cup and the hose. It's going to take a little while for us to see the impact of these past 2 cups that we've used. But we have been and will continue to ascribe deadlines to when those projects have to be completed.
Okay.
And
I would like to just
about those. Go ahead. I was going to say one other thing. I have to applaud the first round that I've seen of awards from the state, particularly for some of the names I didn't see that had applied and didn't get any money. I thought it was a very judicious round of grants, and I really appreciated seeing them.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
And just by a note of comparison, I will share I was in Kansas last week. Their deadline for their very first round of ARPA money isn't until the very end of this year. So Wisconsin has a very nice head start on some of these other states. To the timing of the infrastructure money, this is where we do the Washington, D.C. hurry up and wait. So I will say I really don't expect to see money going out the door into the ground until maybe the first part of 2023. The regulatory process, there's going to be a rulemaking process. Obviously, we will see folks will be contesting things. It will then have to translate to the states, who will take the interpretation of what they've gotten from NTIA as they also go through their distribution, in terms of how much of that money will they get based on how many unserved they actually have. And then I think the other thing to just throw into the mix is you've had ARPA, you've had CARES, you'll have infrastructure, you'll have regular deployment, and we have supply chain issues. We have difficulty getting CPE, consumer premise equipment, access to a lot of different things in this space. We also have a real supply chain issue when it comes to workforce training and the ability to actually have people on the ground who can put, as all of this money comes in at the same time, who can actually be digging trenches and climbing poles and doing all the work that it's going to take. So I just say that as a note of caution because it is still going to take some time to get this regulatory process underway. But I think everybody will be very motivated to move as quickly as they possibly can.
Rick, if I could just add, somebody who's built a lot of fiber, and it takes a while. And right now we're waiting on a lot of fiber on order to build more into several surrounding counties. But building fiber is a marathon. It's not a sprint, but it's worth the wait.
Okay. And Keith, you mentioned you're waiting. I mean, what are the supply chain issues like now?
We're looking at 12-month waits on some of the fiber we've ordered. We've ordered some several months back, and we're hoping we're getting a little at a time, but we're waiting on a lot more.
Okay. Is it just the fiber, or is it other equipment and things too? I mean, supply chain issues.
Well, the electronics
all over the place.
Electronics as well, but the fiber is the big thing right now. If we had all the fiber we ordered sitting in our warehouse, we would be building a lot more quickly.
And I would just kind of add on to that in reality of someone, as someone like Shirley, we spend a lot of time in DC, maybe more than we care to, being native Wisconsinites. But I think that that's even why it's even more critical to have these principles about how you're going to use existing funding that's available today, and to factor in supply chain issues when you're thinking about grants. And that's why I think a toolkit approach is going to serve states and cities well in approaching this problem, because you have to think about how these things come to bear in terms of people still either being completely unconnected with no option at all, or being underserved, being with the reality that the options that are available are not really accessible due to adoption/affordability challenges.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Vicki. Kind of like to go back to Kelly's question a while ago, talking about accountability. As we're going forward here, how do we achieve that so that, when we look back in 5 years or 10 years from now, we can say, yes, these companies really did what they said they were going to do?
I think it's data, Rick. I mean, I think it's data, and I think what Jim is doing at the county level, if we could replicate that in all 72 counties, we would be in a really great spot. But it's data, and it is incumbent upon us at the Public Service Commission when we get comments in opposition to an applicant because the opposing party says, no, we have plans to build there, then we say, okay, give us that spatial data so that we can actually be able to compare it. Otherwise, as Professor Orton said, you're just looking at a very crude picture on the wall. And that's not going to help anybody. So when Vicki talks about the tools in the toolbox, I would argue that really granular data is the most important tool that we can get. And we cannot afford to sit back and wait for the FCC to do something. It is incumbent upon us. And when I say us, I say me at the Public Service Commission and the State Broadband Office, that to the extent that we have dollars that we are available, that we are able to distribute, we have to think about ways that how can we leverage those dollars to get better data.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Rebecca. Anyone else on that? I mean, Barry, your thoughts on accountability? How do we know that this is all going to happen?
Well, a lot of this stuff is done on faith. And the leap of faith is quite large in some cases in the past. And I think as the PSC chairperson said, built into these grants are going to have to be specific data points, specific reporting, specific oversight. The problem is it's in the absence of bigger oversight over landline phones. You can't dial 911, as we heard in the intro video, in some places in this state anymore, because the oversight was removed by the legislature. And the oversight over cable was removed by the legislature. So these people are really operating in a laissez-faire atmosphere now. So putting on top of that the need for oversight for these grants is very tricky when you don't have oversight over the whole operation to begin with.
And I would say that Wisconsin is, and I'm proud to say this as being, my home state, is really providing and preparing best practices in this space. I think the reimbursement model makes a lot of sense. I think you could add additional teeth to that model by including penalties if things are not done at a certain time by a certain time frame. We've seen that with some of the federal dollars for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, but as well as the Connect America Fund. So that's another stick that the PSC and others have in their toolkit as a way to really get to that enforceability and holding providers' feet to the fire to ensure that they deliver on their promises.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Vicki. Another question here, and I know we're running long on time, but this is a really good one, as are the others that were submitted too. We can't get to everyone, but there's so many good questions here. One gentleman pointed out that look, I mean, if people wanted faster internet, they should just move to areas with higher populations or where it is. It's basically, he says, except if you're a farmer, people have a choice. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess what I would say, and admittedly I'm biased because we live in a destination kind of an area with one of the densest concentrations of fresh water in the world. But based on census data, 19% of the U.S. population lives in a small town or rural environment. But the most recent Gallup poll I've seen, which was December of last year, said that 48% of the population would prefer to live rural if they could. And so the whole idea is, and it's what we're working on here in Vilas County, is to be able to live where you want to, not where you have to because of your work.
And I would love to jump in on that one, because I think that just shows, I think it's one of the things that makes this country great is the ability to value what every part of the country brings. And I think it's also a little, people also get stuck and think that rural Americans are all farmers. A very small percentage of rural Americans are farmers. It's small business owners. It's where our energy is derived from. It's kind of like the analogy when I meet with people in Washington, D.C., and they say, why do we care about rural America? I get my milk at the store. And it's like, oh, we got to go further back through this chain for you to understand, all the components. But I do think there's a really interesting opportunity with connectivity where we can, to Jim's point, is this a time for a rural renaissance? I look at companies like Nevada, Wisconsin, participating in the Wisconsin telecommuting program. We're a great telecommuting community, and we have seen people during the pandemic realizing that they can work from anywhere. You don't need to work in a large urban center where your costs might be higher and your stress is higher. So I think that we have a real moment in time as a country to really reset what we think is the best use of our natural resources and the best use of where people live and work and play.
And I also think it's a little bit of a misnomer and almost a little bit of urban fiction that has been created. This is not rural versus urban. As a person who lives in an urban center, I can tell you that my broadband service heading into the pandemic were far less than 25.3. And I live just outside of Milwaukee. So I think we do all of ourselves a disservice when we try to position this as urban versus rural. It's a digital divide, and the digital divide is real, whether you are 2 miles from Milwaukee or you are in Vilas County. It's a problem that needs to be solved.
And Rick, as a person who lives in a town of 700, which is the largest town that we serve, I think we all deserve quality broadband, and we, especially during the pandemic, we have people moving here from California, New York, New Jersey, and a lot of them are coming here to work from home. We're glad to have them, and we just, I don't buy that argument. Move to the city if you want better broadband.
Okay, thank you, everyone. This has just been fantastic today. You've all covered so much. I guess I'll just kind of toss it out. Any final thoughts or conclusions drawn from today's discussion?
Well, I wanted to thank you, Rick, for the work you've been doing over the last months and the reports you've done. You've taken a extremely deep dive into this, and the results are excellent. And the paper and Marquette owe you, and we owe them some thanks.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate that.
I also want to thank you, Rick, for inviting me and for having this conversation. And I just hope, we've got a possible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here with this infrastructure bill and all the other monies that are coming down for broadband and rural broadband and affordability. Let's don't mess it up. Let's take advantage.
And I'll just give a final plug. The emergency broadband benefit is still out there. Of course, Wisconsin, I love to tout how Wisconsin's always at the top of our game, but we are leading the rest of the nation in terms of adoption of that emergency broadband benefit. We've got about 20% of eligible households enrolled, but we need to do more. So I would just use this as a moment to remind people that there is the emergency broadband benefit that's out there. It's $30 a month off of broadband services for qualifying eligible households. And then I would honestly and genuinely direct anybody to the PSC for any questions at the State Broadband Office. We are here to help. We have data. We would love to have more data, but we are certainly a resource because, as Professor said, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do this correctly.
Okay. Thank you all very much. It's been a great discussion today. Really appreciate all your thoughts.
Rick, thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks,
Okay.
Rick.
That's right.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.